Dear learners, welcome back to WSE True Stories, where English learning becomes an unforgettable adventure. Today, we bring you a story that may not be found in many school books, but it deserves to be heard across generations and across the world. This is the story of a man who quietly walked through jungles, worked in lonely labs, healed people in remote villages, and made one of the most important discoveries in the history of medicine. He wasn't interested in fame. He avoided politics. And yet, his work saved millions of lives. His name? Alexandre Yersin. Born in Europe, but beloved in Asia, especially in Vietnam, Yersin was more than a scientist. He was a doctor, an explorer, a visionary who saw further than most. He discovered the plague-causing bacteria, yes. But more than that, he devoted his life to serving others, even in the farthest corners of the earth. This is not just a story of science. It's a story of purpose, humility, and an unshakable belief in progress. By the end of this journey, you will not only improve your English, you will understand what it means to dedicate your life to something greater than yourself. Get ready for a story of intellect, adventure, and silent heroism. Let's begin the remarkable journey of Alexandre Yersin. The year was 1863. Europe was in the middle of great change. New machines were transforming cities. Scientists were unlocking secrets of the universe. In a small town in Switzerland, a boy named Alexandre Yersin was born into this world of possibility, a world where the thirst for knowledge was matched only by the courage to chase it. Yersin was raised in the town of Aubonne, a quiet place surrounded by nature and silence. His father, a schoolteacher, died shortly before Alexandre was born. His mother, strong and devoted, raised the family with care and discipline. From the beginning, young Alexandre was different. He was calm, curious, and unusually quiet. While other boys played games, he often sat with books, completely absorbed in strange questions. Why do diseases spread? What lies beyond the mountains? Switzerland was known for its mountains, but Yersin looked further, beyond borders, beyond safety. He grew up during a time when the world was being redrawn. Colonial empires were expanding, and global travel was possible like never before. The French Empire, especially, had growing interests in Asia and Africa. For many young Europeans, this meant adventure, discovery, and for some, a chance to serve. But while many were drawn by power or gold, Yersin was drawn by purpose. His mind wandered not to riches, but to remote lands where people suffered from mysterious illnesses, without medicine, without doctors. The late 19th century was also a dangerous time for public health. Epidemics like cholera and plague returned again and again, and no one really understood why. Scientists like Louis Pasteur were beginning to explore the hidden world of bacteria. Could invisible life forms be causing deadly diseases? This question fascinated Yersin. He studied medicine in Lausanne, then moved to Paris, the beating heart of scientific research at the time. There, he became part of the Pasteur Institute, one of the world's leading centers for microbiology. Under the guidance of Pasteur himself and his followers, Yersin developed a deep respect for science, not as a path to prestige, but as a tool to help humankind. Yet even in the world's finest laboratories, Yersin felt restless. He was never fully comfortable in the lecture halls and salons of Paris. He preferred the unknown. He wanted to touch the earth, smell the sea, and work directly with those in need. He had the heart of a scientist, but the soul of an explorer. And soon, that spirit would take him to the other side of the world, to a land he had never seen, but would one day call home. When Alexandre Yersin arrived in Indochina in the early 1890s, it was not to lead an expedition or open a hospital, but to serve as a ship's doctor for the Messageries Maritimes, a French shipping company. At just under 30 years old, he had already left behind the prestigious Pasteur Institute. To many of his colleagues, this seemed like a strange move. Why would a promising scientist abandon his future in Europe for an uncertain life at sea? But Yersin was searching for something deeper, something the polished laboratories of Paris could not offer. On board the ship sailing between Saigon, Manila, and Hong Kong, he found exactly what he was looking for: real people, real problems, and real suffering. He listened to sailors, merchants, and local passengers speak of mysterious fevers, sudden deaths, entire villages left empty by disease. While others looked away, Yersin leaned in. The streets of Asian port cities were filled with energy and trade, but behind the bustle lay harsh realities. Sanitation was poor. Medicine was scarce. In the tropical heat, diseases spread like wildfire. Colonial medical systems often failed to reach rural populations, and many viewed Western doctors with suspicion or indifference. Yersin, however, approached every case with humility. He treated without pride and listened without judgment. And yet, what he saw disturbed him. The more he traveled, the more he witnessed the effects of invisible killers: strange fevers, swollen bodies, blackened skin. One illness in particular terrified people: the plague. Though it had ravaged Europe centuries before, whispers of its return were beginning to spread again. In Hong Kong, something deadly was brewing. By 1894, the rumors had turned into horror. A full outbreak of bubonic plague had erupted in the city, killing thousands in just weeks. Panic filled the air. Ships were quarantined. Streets were abandoned. No one knew what was causing it, or how to stop it. Yersin was in French Indochina when the news reached him. He knew this was not just another epidemic. It was a moment of truth. Many others hesitated, afraid to enter a city drowning in death. But Yersin didn't wait. He packed his equipment, boarded a ship, and sailed straight toward the danger. He wasn't the only scientist heading there. A Japanese bacteriologist named Kitasato Shibasaburo had already arrived in Hong Kong with backing from the powerful Pasteur Institute. But Yersin had something different, a determination untouched by politics or prestige. He was not racing for fame. He was driven by a simple, quiet question. What is this disease, and how can we stop it? The road ahead would be filled with doubt, resistance, and even disrespect. Yersin was an outsider, working without a proper lab, surrounded by fear and chaos. But in that storm of confusion, he remained focused. He didn't need perfect conditions. He just needed one thing: the truth. And in a small, makeshift tent in the heart of a plague-stricken city, that truth was about to reveal itself. The year was 1894, and Alexandre Yersin stepped off the ship into a city choking with death. Hong Kong was in the grip of the third Great Plague pandemic, and terror was everywhere, not only among the people, but among doctors and officials as well. Corpses lined the alleys. Families were torn apart overnight. Entire neighborhoods were sealed off, like living tombs. And in the center of it all, an invisible assassin, a microbe no one could see or understand. Yersin had no grand laboratory, no well-funded team, and little support. Compared to the Japanese researcher Kitasato, who had access to formal hospital facilities and French institutional favor, Yersin's situation was humble, almost desperate. He was given permission to work outside the official hospital, in a tiny hut near the harbor. But to him, that hut became a sanctuary of hope. He was calm but urgent. Alone, he set up basic equipment, a microscope, a few glass slides, and a handful of sterilized tools. He had no assistant, no translator. Yet every morning, he walked through infected streets to retrieve corpses, paying locals from his own pocket so he could examine their lymph nodes, their blood, their final secrets. For days, he worked in silence, focused and unafraid. Each body he dissected told him something new. The swollen black buboes on the neck and armpits, the blood thick with infection, the telltale signs of bacterial invasion. Then, finally, under the lens of his microscope, he saw it, a tiny rod-shaped bacterium that appeared again and again in every victim. It was consistent, clear, and chilling. Yersin had found the enemy. The plague was not caused by bad air or divine punishment. It was a specific bacterium, living and multiplying in the body, and it had a name, Yersinia pestis. But the discovery was only the beginning. He needed to prove it to the world. At first, few believed him. Kitasato had also published findings but with less clarity, and due to the politics of science, many journals favored the Japanese team. Yersin, however, was not interested in credit. He continued his work, testing and retesting the organism, building a chain of proof that no one could deny. He also noticed something else: rats. Dead ones were found near plague victims. Could they be part of the chain? He observed more closely and began to suspect that fleas, carried by rats, were the true messengers of death. It was an insight that would take years to confirm, but Yersin had already connected the dots ahead of his time. His work in Hong Kong was met with quiet resistance and bureaucratic coldness. He wasn't celebrated. He wasn't welcomed. But still, he worked. Every late night and early morning, every observation and drawing brought him closer to the truth, and further from comfort. He sacrificed sleep, safety, and recognition, all in pursuit of a cure. The plague had once wiped out a third of Europe. But now, for the first time, humanity had a real chance to fight back. Yersin sent samples back to the Pasteur Institute, where scientists began working on a serum, a treatment that could protect against the disease. His discovery lit the torch. Others would carry it forward. Still, Yersin didn't stay to collect praise. When the storm calmed, he simply packed his things and left. No headline announced his name. No parade welcomed his return. He had done what he came to do. But for Yersin, science was only one path. His journey was far from over, and his next steps would lead him deep into a land where he would spend the rest of his life. The world had begun to recognize Alexandre Yersin's discovery, though slowly, and often without giving him proper credit. The bacterium he identified, later named Yersinia pestis in his honor, became the cornerstone of future research on the plague. A serum was developed at the Pasteur Institute, and Yersin helped set up facilities in Asia to produce it. Lives were saved. Cities reopened. Fear began to fade. But Yersin? He didn't stay in the spotlight. Fame never interested him. His heart was already elsewhere, in the green hills and quiet rivers of a distant land that had welcomed him not as a foreigner, but as a friend. That land was Vietnam. In 1895, after the plague outbreak, Yersin returned to French Indochina, but this time, not as a traveling doctor or ship's physician. He settled in Nha Trang, a peaceful coastal town. The sea reminded him of home, and the gentle rhythm of life allowed him to breathe, to think. Here, for the first time, he began to feel rooted. But his rest was short-lived. One day, he heard stories from local people and French officials about a plateau in the Central Highlands, a place where the air was cool, where malaria was rare, and where few dared to explore. That place was called Lang Biang, near what is now Dalat. The moment he heard about it, something stirred inside him. It was the old explorer's spirit, the call of the unknown. And so, in 1897, with little more than a notebook, a horse, and a group of local guides, Yersin rode into the mist-covered highlands. The journey was grueling. There were no roads, only forest paths and mountain trails. He faced wild animals, extreme weather, and exhaustion. Yet he pressed on, driven not by orders or ambition, but by an inner fire. He believed that this land held promise. It could be a sanctuary from disease, a center for science, a home for future generations. When he reached the Langbiang Plateau, he was struck by its beauty. Rolling hills stretched beneath the clouds. Pine forests whispered in the wind. The temperature was cool and clean, a perfect place for health, agriculture, and knowledge. Yersin knew instantly, this was a place worth building. He returned to Nha Trang, but he did not forget the plateau. With the support of colonial officials, and more importantly, the cooperation of local communities, Yersin began the quiet work of planning. His vision was not of grand cities or political conquest. He imagined a center of learning, of farming, of healing. He experimented with crops, introducing the first rubber trees and quinine-producing cinchona plants to Vietnam. He built a small research station and continued to develop vaccines and treatments for tropical diseases. He trained local apprentices, helped farmers improve yields, and always kept learning. What kind of man does all this, not for money, not for praise, but simply because he believes it is right? What does it mean to dedicate your life not to power, but to service? Yersin's turning point was not a loud triumph, but a quiet decision, to stay. To give himself fully to a country that was not his by birth, but had become his by choice. And the land embraced him in return. While many colonial figures were viewed with resentment, Yersin was loved. The Vietnamese people called him Ong Nam, Uncle Nam, a term of deep affection. Children knew his face. Families trusted his care. It is rare in history to find such a man, one who walks with giants in science, but lives humbly among villagers. One who could have risen in status, but chose instead to kneel beside the sick, to plant trees, to teach. But the greatest tests of character often come not in discovery, but in the slow work that follows, the lifelong labor of building something that will last. The highlands of Vietnam became more than a landscape to Alexandre Yersin, they became a mirror to his soul. Peaceful, remote, and rich in life. But even in this chosen place, he was never fully at ease. The early 1900s brought deeper tensions. Colonial rule tightened. Inequality widened. And Yersin, a European, lived at the heart of a colonized land. He was not blind to this. He had seen the arrogance of empire, doctors who refused to touch patients, officials who looked at the local population as mere laborers, scientists who collected data but ignored the people it came from. He chose a different path. While his peers climbed ladders of influence, Yersin quietly stepped down, walking barefoot into rural villages, treating the poor with equal care as the elite. But the price of humility is often isolation. Many colonial authorities questioned his loyalties. Some even accused him of being too close to the Vietnamese, of forgetting his place. Funding for his work grew harder to obtain. He refused to wear the formal dress of high-ranking doctors. He avoided Paris conferences and French politics. He wrote letters, not speeches. And yet, he stayed. Even when war clouds gathered over Europe, even when the hills of Dalat filled with the whispers of rebellion, Yersin remained, not as an occupier, but as a servant of health. There were moments of great loneliness. He never married. He had no children. His closest companions were his research journals, his animals, and the villagers who came to him with illnesses and gratitude. While others built empires, he built trust. One day, a severe outbreak of plague struck a northern province. The colonial government hesitated. Quarantine was expensive. Sending medical help was risky. But Yersin volunteered, without pay, without protection. He gathered supplies, loaded his cart, and made the difficult journey through rough terrain. He arrived to chaos. Fear had turned to panic. Villagers were hiding the sick. Bodies lay unattended. He worked day and night, organizing sanitation, administering vaccines, offering comfort. When asked why he risked his life again and again, he simply replied, "To be a doctor is to go where you are needed. No more, no less." But this choice, to always give, to always go, took its toll. His health began to fade. Decades of travel, lab work, and field treatment left him physically weak. Still, he refused to retire. Why did he choose such a life? Why give everything, yet ask for nothing? Perhaps the answer lies in his belief that science must serve humanity, not institutions, not governments, but people. Yersin lived that ideal, every day, often in silence. He could have returned to France and lived as a hero. But he knew his work wasn't finished. He stayed in Vietnam through both world wars, through political upheaval, through loneliness. He had found a home, and he had made a promise, to serve, to heal, and never to abandon. And in that promise, he found something greater than success. He found meaning. It was a life of sacrifice, but also of profound peace. And though history might have forgotten him for a time, the seeds he planted, in soil, in science, and in the hearts of people, were already beginning to grow. By the time Alexandre Yersin reached his later years, his name had quietly become a legend, not on grand stages, but in village whispers and hospital corridors. He never asked for honors, yet honors came. Streets in Vietnam were named after him. A school bore his name. In Paris, scientists referenced his discoveries with reverence. But Yersin himself remained unchanged, still in his modest home in Nha Trang, still tending to his garden, still researching quietly by candlelight. His greatest achievement was not just the discovery of Yersinia pestis. It was how he turned knowledge into healing. He established medical outposts across Indochina, places where vaccines could be produced and distributed quickly. His efforts helped control outbreaks of plague, diphtheria, smallpox, and other deadly diseases. In doing so, he laid the foundation for Vietnam's early public health system, long before the idea of global health even existed. Yersin also transformed agriculture. He introduced rubber trees, quinine, and other essential crops to the highlands, helping Vietnam become more self-sufficient. He conducted weather studies, cataloged plant life, and promoted sustainable farming. His work supported not just survival, but development. And then, there was Dalat. His exploration of the Lang Biang Plateau inspired the founding of the mountain city of Dalat, envisioned as a place of retreat and renewal, free from the heat and disease of the lowlands. Though it was later developed more formally by the French, it was Yersin's daring journey that revealed its potential. Even today, people in Dalat speak his name with gratitude. They remember the man who walked the mountains alone so that others might breathe easier. But perhaps his greatest legacy was the bond he built between science and compassion, between East and West, between the powerful and the powerless. In a time of deep inequality and division, Yersin proved that humility could be revolutionary. He didn't conquer. He connected. And the people never forgot. In Vietnam, where colonial memories often carry bitterness, Yersin remained beloved. Even after the French left, his grave in Nha Trang was preserved. Locals cleaned it, brought flowers, and told their children stories of Ong Nam, the gentle doctor who never left them. One Vietnamese poet once asked, "What is the measure of a man, the medals on his chest, or the lives he lifts?" For Yersin, the answer was always clear. He died in 1943, at the age of 80, in his small house by the sea. There was no fanfare, no final speech. Just quiet, as he had always lived. But the silence did not last. The seeds of his work, in medicine, in education, in human dignity, continued to grow long after his passing. He had created something enduring, not fame, but trust. Not an empire, but a legacy of care. And in the hearts of those he touched, he remains a quiet hero, still watching from the hills, still walking beside those who serve. What remains of a man who never sought glory, yet gave the world so much? Alexandre Yersin's legacy is not made of monuments or medals. It lives in the pulse of life, in every child who survives a once deadly illness, in every student inspired by science, in every act of compassion carried out without need for praise. He showed us that greatness is not loud. Sometimes, it walks softly, carrying a lantern into the darkness, simply to help others see. Today, Yersin is remembered not just as the man who discovered the plague bacterium, but as a rare figure in history, a scientist who never forgot the human soul behind every diagnosis. A doctor who practiced not only with skill, but with empathy. A foreigner who became family. A revolutionary, not with weapons, but with kindness and truth. His story invites us to ask, what do we do with our knowledge? Do we use it to rise, or to lift others? What is success, if not measured by the lives we touch? For English learners, Yersin's story is more than history. It's a path of meaning. His life teaches vocabulary in humanity, words like integrity, devotion, humility, and legacy. It shows that the language of impact transcends borders, titles, and time. He also teaches us something deeper, that even one quiet life, lived with courage and purpose, can change the course of history. In Vietnamese homes, his name still echoes with affection. Not as a foreign scientist, but as a part of their story. As one of their own. As someone who gave, and never stopped giving. As we reflect on his journey, from the Swiss Alps to the Vietnamese highlands, from microscope lenses to mountain paths, we realize something powerful. Alexandre Yersin's life was not a single discovery, but a long, gentle revolution. A revolution of care. And that is the kind of revolution the world still needs today. Dear learners, you've just walked through the remarkable life of Alexandre Yersin, a man who proved that true greatness doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes, it wears a simple coat, walks unknown roads, and quietly saves lives without asking for anything in return. Yersin's story is not only a tribute to science and medicine. It is a reminder that one person, with deep purpose and quiet strength, can bring light to the darkest corners. He didn't chase power. He didn't build a fortune. He built trust, healed the sick, and devoted himself to a people far from his homeland, yet closer to his heart than any place on earth. You have the power to do the same in your life, not by being perfect, but by being present. Not by chasing titles, but by asking, "How can I help?" If this story touched you, if it inspired you or helped you improve your English even a little, we hope you'll carry Yersin's message forward. Share his story. Speak of his compassion. Let it remind us that in every field, medicine, education, science, or service, the most valuable gift is still the heart. To support this journey of storytelling and learning, you can click the thanks button or tap join to explore exclusive perks. Every little gesture helps us continue creating stories that matter for learners like you around the world. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep believing in the quiet power of good. Goodbye for now, and thank you for listening to the story of Alexandre Yersin.